Welcome, everyone. I'm Bob Lawrence, the director of the Center for Livable Future, and very pleased to welcome you to the Polly Walker Ecology Fund sponsored talk by Francis Thicke. The fund was established by a generous gift from a local donor, and it provides funding for events such as this, but it also provides resources for students and faculty interested in exploring problems in ecology. Polly, as many of you will remember, was the first full-time staff member of the Center for a Livable Future, joined me in that undertaking back in 1996. And she served as the associate director until 2008. And it was Polly, a pediatrician by training and then an MPH student in the part-time program while she was working 60 or 70 hours a week on the CLF startup, who reminded me of the centrality of an ecologic perspective for the food system, and was fond of the quote by Sir Albert Howard, who in 1939 said that the whole problem of health in soil, plant, animal, and man is one great subject. And public health is certainly an area where we need increasingly to take an ecologic perspective, and clearly our connection with the food system makes this an urgent matter. This is also the second annual Food Day. Mike Jacobson at the Center for Science and the Public Interest in Washington launched Food Day a year ago, and we participated with a review teach-in about food system issues. And this year, we decided that we would recognize Food Day by inviting Francis Thicke to be our guest speaker. Francis and I met in Montana a year ago, and at a meeting of farmers, food system people, academics, geneticists, economists. It was quite an eclectic gathering. The star of the event was Wendell Berry, but people like Fred Kirschenman were there. Actually, Fred was there remotely. He was undergoing treatment for an illness at the time. But a lot of people who have been very important to us here at the CLF in shaping and molding our agenda for work, looking at the food system from a public health perspective. So we hit it off, and I said to Francis, would we ever be able to pry you away from Iowa to give a talk at the School of Public Health in Baltimore? And he graciously agreed, and we're very, very pleased to welcome him here today. He and his wife, Susan, own and operate an 80-cow grass-based organic dairy near Fairfield, Iowa. They process all of their milk on the farm and market dairy products, liquid milk, cheeses, yogurts, through grocery stores and restaurants in Fairfield. And Francis, if I recall correctly, you sell everything you produce within about 10 miles of your farm, 5 miles. So talk about a local food shed. That's about as local as you can get. Francis started out as an undergraduate in philosophy and music, and then entered conservatory to do concert trumpet, and decided that soil was more interesting. But he does now have a piccolo trumpet that he plays, and an 8-foot long alpine horn, 12-foot alpine horn that he plays at Oktoberfest in Iowa. He's a man of many seasons and many parts. But he did then go on to get a PhD in soil science and worked for the U.S. Department of Agriculture as the national program leader for soil science in the Extension Service in Washington. And this is the part where my memory is a little blurry, so correct me if I get it wrong. But Francis and Susan, after living in what many of us regard as the nicest part of the country, decided that maybe it would be good to get back to the Midwest and actually set an example of how soil could be conserved, soil could be improved, and we could move toward an ecological and sustainable agriculture system. So they purchased a small dairy, and this is going to be part of Francis' presentation, so I won't go into further detail, other than to say that it's been very, very widely acknowledged as a model for sustainable ecologic agriculture in the best tradition of Aldo Leopold and Sir Francis Howard. Francis has been honored by receiving the 2012 Moses Organic Farmer of the Year Award, the 2009 Spencer Award for Sustainable Agriculture from the Aldo Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture at Iowa State, the Sustainable Agriculture Achievement Award from Practical Farmers of Iowa, Steward of the Land Award from the Iowa Sierra Club, and the Friend of Extension Award from the Iowa State University Extension Service. 2 years ago, Francis published this wonderful book, A New Vision for Iowa Food and Agriculture, and it is a really delight to read, and I commend it to all of you. Lots of insights into what it takes to really move from theory to practice. And in defiance of that University of Chicago t-shirt I've heard about, it works in practice, but will it work in theory? So Francis has demonstrated that what he worked on in extension and theory really does work in practice. You see at the bottom of the slide the hash marks for those of you who are watching from streaming video what is the hashtag? Pound sign? Yeah, pound sign. Food Day CLF and Food Day 2012. So please feel free to comment, tweet during the lecture, and during the question and answer period, we'll have Francis address your comments. So without any further delay, Francis, thank you so much for being here. Please join me in welcoming Francis Thicke.
Thank you, Bob, for the great introduction. And I also want to thank Dr. Polly Walker for her support for making this all happen. So I appreciate that. I had a little tour of what's going on here this morning, and I'm really impressed. I had no idea this is happening. You have a lot of things happening here, and so it's really exciting to see that. Bob mentioned that I had worked at USDA, and he didn't quite call me a bureaucrat, but really, you might say I was, but that gives me license to give you a little anecdote about Washington bureaucrats, and it has to do with the price of oil. You know, in 2008, the price of oil hit $147 a barrel, and then in 7 months it went down to $38 a barrel, and then it started coming up again. Now it's up 100 or something, and nobody seems to know where it's going next. But a farmer friend of mine said he knows why. He said, nobody's checking the oil. You see, most of the oil in this country is under Texas and Oklahoma, but all the dipsticks are in Washington, D.C. So what I want to do is, I wanted to see how stodgy you guys were. Let's try that again, yeah.
One more.
Twice?
The one that looks like the champagne glass.
Oh, what am I doing? I knew that. What am I doing? Okay. Okay, so I want to use my farm as a model for some of the things I'm talking about. But first of all, I wanted to look at where we are. How did we get to our widely industrialized agriculture? What got us there, and what's going to have to happen to make it change? And some of the forces, I think, are that we are at the end of the cheap fossil fuels era. If you look at agriculture anywhere in this country, industrial agriculture, it's readily apparent it's highly dependent upon fossil fuels. And we are at the end of that era. So that's going to necessitate a change. Climate change. Our weather is becoming more and more unstable. We've seen this year a huge drought in Iowa. And last year we had a drought as well. In 2008, we had a 500-year flood. And so it's like we're seeing these severe weather events that are meaning that we're going to have to become more resilient in our cropping systems. We're seeing a depletion of the aquifers, the fossil water the Ogallala Aquifer, for example. Some places in southern U.S., it's getting out of reach for pumping. It's going to change our agriculture. All around the world, we're seeing depletion of water aquifers. Depletion of fertilizer reserves. The U.S. had some of the largest reserves of phosphate fertilizer, and the industry tells us we only have 20 to 25 years left in this country. Worldwide, maybe 50 years of readily extractable phosphate, maybe 100 years with high energy extraction. So without phosphorus fertilizer, we cannot farm the way we do it all. And so some of these things are really going to change agriculture. We're saturating our waste sinks. For example, the dead zone is, the U.S. Geological Survey tells us that 60% of the nitrate, the limiting nutrient for the dead zone, comes from corn and soybean production in the Midwest. So we are overloading the ability of nature to take these up. Now that continental shelves are productive for seafood production, to some extent because nutrients come down the rivers and feed. But when you overload it, then you have the opposite effect, of course, and you start to kill off the sea life. So we are saturating our waste sinks around the country. And society is saying they want us to change things, not only by people buying locally produced food and buying food that is raised the way they think it should be raised, but also through regulations. And we're going to look at some of that here in a minute. There's a couple of statements I just decided to write down. I think that we're at the end of this climate stability, it seems, and resource abundance. And so we're getting to that end of the industrial era just because we're running out of some of these resources. And so now we need to rethink about what we're going to be doing with agriculture, what is really sustainable. And I think the main thing is it's going to have to become more resilient. And I'm going to look at ecology as a model for how we can do that, how we can design our agriculture based upon the model of ecology. And from the Midwest, that's where the prairies were. I say were. But let's look at that model. Now, the prairies are famous for being very diverse. And actually, the Midwest soils are famous for being very productive, deep, black, rich soils. And how did that happen? But, in the north-central U.S., Midwest, 12,000 years ago, where these productive soils are now, there was no soil. When the last glacier receded, it was a geologic wasteland. It was only when plants and animals colonized that geologic material and began to put organic matter into that geologic material that it created the soils and created these very productive soils. So it was nature's ecology that did that, really. And if we look at part of that process, the bison were part of that. The prairie grasses were famous for being very tall and very deep-rooted. When the bison would come through and graze off the tall grass, and it was short, it didn't need that deep root system. So it sloughed some of that root mass off into the ground. It would grow a new top, more roots, get grazed off again, over and over, pulsing that organic matter deep into the soil, creating these black, rich soils that are famous in the Midwest, in Iowa, northern Iowa in particular. Now, in Iowa, since we started farming, we've lost about half our topsoil to erosion. And we've lost over half of our organic carbon, that black organic carbon, to oxidation. So we are depleting our ecological capital by the way we are farming. And we can see that we can't go on forever that way. What I want to do now is compare this ecological model with an industrial model that is prevalent today. But in nature's ecology, we've seen it's the diversity in a prairie or a forest system. It's self-sufficient. To build those soils didn't take fertilizers and pesticides. It created it by itself. Nature's ecology bootstrapped that all. And it's also very conservative, recycles everything. So in a natural ecosystem, there really is virtually no pollution because it's very diverse, and the waste of one species is food for other species. Everything is cycled and recycled, and the capital is built up, the ecological capital. Now let's compare that to an industrial system. We replace that diversity with a monoculture, whether it's thousands of acres of wheat in Montana or monoculture cotton in California, corn, soybeans in the Midwest. Even the animals tend to be monoculture. Here is a large hog confinement operation where thousands, maybe 5,000 hogs are in one place. This could be 10,000 hogs in one place. And so this is different than how nature organizes it in this industrial system. Here is a building with 10,000 turkeys in one place. This is the largest feedlot in the country, in Idaho. There are 125,000 animals in this feedlot. And the person who took the picture said that this only showed 15%. As he turned off to the right, as far as he could see, it was black with animals. And so a couple things is that this is not the way nature organizes it. Of course, there were bisons were in big herds, but they moved. And this is probably something that we wouldn't do without cheap fossil fuels. And of course, then the animals in the confinement system are not organized as nature would either. These are sow gestation crates, more of them here. And what's interesting is that society is starting to stand up and say, we don't really want to have animals raised this way. Now there are 8 states around the country that have going into place some laws or regulations that will phase out these gestation crates. And if you don't know what these are, the animals are confined for like 3 or 4 months in here during gestation, and they cannot turn around, of course. It is not a real natural environment for them. Here are veal calf crates where the calves are tied for 3 or 4 months of their lifetime, and often kept in the dark so the meat is white. And 5 states are outlawing these, as a matter of fact. And the other thing that you're probably familiar with are the chickens laying hens in crates, where 4 or 5 or 6 chickens are in one crate so small that one chicken couldn't stand up and raise its wings. And most people aren't aware that your eggs come from these kind of situations, but sometimes when people find out, they decide they're going to buy different eggs. And so just that choice makes a difference. But also some states, 2 states now are beginning to phase out chickens in crates. We can raise animals in different ways. Here are hogs raised out in pasture in ways that are ecologically sound and that accommodate the animal's natural behavior much better than the crates, of course. Also in hoop houses, where there are in deep bedded houses where they have a lot of bedding to run around in and can express more of their natural behaviors compared to for example, hogs that are in this kind of confinement system on concrete slots where the mirror falls down below. A large dairy here in Colorado, in this picture, which you can see is not in a desert. It's not really something that really is readily supported in a desert without any water. And of course, cows can be grazed. This is from my farm. It can be put outside, and it's their natural location. They can express a lot of their own behaviors. We're going to look more at that. And in industrial agriculture, we replace that self-sufficiency with high inputs, need for high inputs. For example, corn, to keep that monoculture, requires herbicides to keep other plants out, normally fungicides and insecticides, and a lot of fertilizer to keep it all growing. So all these inputs are required to maintain that monoculture. For example, this is from a study looking at corn production, the different fuel energy inputs. Fuel is actually a small amount compared to fertilizer. We see the tractors and the combines and we think, boy, that takes a lot of fuel, and it does. But fertilizer production, especially nitrogen fertilizer, takes a huge amount of energy to keep this monoculture going. And also, it tends to leak. Because we have a monoculture system, it tends to be leaky. In the Midwest, the corn and soybeans are generally growing over soils that have tile drainage. About 3 or 4 feet down, there are drainage systems in place that then come out into ditches that go to the streams and lakes. Streams and rivers, and eventually to the Gulf of Mexico. And I'm sure you're familiar with the dead zone of the Gulf of Mexico. Here's Texas and Louisiana, which gets about the size of the state of New Jersey every summer as the nutrients come down, and it causes the algae to bloom. And then when the algae die and begin to decompose, it depletes the water of oxygen. So the sea life either has to leave or die. So that's why it's called the hypoxia zone or the dead zone. This is interesting because it shows kind of why that happens. People think, well, what we should do is just be better at applying nitrogen to corn. We should apply less and be more efficient. But that actually won't do it because these systems are inherently leaky. Because corn and soybeans only grow for about 4 months of the year, where they're actively able to take up nitrogen from the soil system. During the other 8 months of the year, when water percolates through the soil, it takes nitrate with it because no roots are there to intercept that nitrogen. And this illustrates that. I'm just going to look at a couple things in this chart, comparing continuous corn and how much nitrate leached out of the tile drainage over 4 years, a 4-year period. And the total amount for continuous corn was 194 pounds per acre. Corn and soybeans were almost as bad. Soybean leaks almost as bad as corn does. And you might think that shouldn't be because you're not putting nitrogen on soybeans. Soybeans fix their own nitrogen. We're not putting it on. But it's because that 8-month period during the year when nothing is actively growing, no roots are actively growing and taking up nitrate. And some nitrogen is mineralizing from the soil, and that can flush out then. And so it's an inherently leaky system. Compare that to where perennials are in the landscape. Here is alfalfa, a perennial. In it, it's a legume that fixes its own nitrogen. In that 4-year period, the alfalfa only lost 6 pounds of nitrogen, nitrogen. The CRP, which is a conservation program with grass, perennial grass, only lost 4 pounds. Compare that up here, it's 30 times less. And so our systems in Iowa are inherently leaky in the Midwest, and unless we change our cropping system, no tweaking of the system is going to make a difference. We have to change our cropping system to really make a difference. As far as leaks go, the animal systems sometimes tend to leak. Here's a broken lagoon for manure. We have lots of manure spills in Iowa, actually, and over the last 10 years, millions of fish have been killed from manure spills. This is a map of the confinement systems in Iowa, just to give you an idea of how many there are. These little red triangles are each a hog confinement, mostly. The green circles are open feedlots for cattle, for the most part. And you can see in some parts of the state, this is actually 4 years old, so I couldn't get the new map downloaded, but it's a lot thicker. And it's causing a lot of divisiveness in the rural communities, where these things are built near people who've been living there for generations, and suddenly they have this hog confinement next to them that it smells terrible, and there can be dust and a lot of flies and so on. And it's causing a lot of problems in rural Iowa and around the Midwest.
Can you point out Fairfield?
Yeah, good point. Here's Jefferson County, where Fairfield's right around here. And we have, we actually in Fairfield, we have we developed an organization called Jefferson County Farmers and Neighbors that works to help people keep these CAFOs out when they come in. Because the laws are written in favor of the CAFOs. There's no local control. Local governments cannot have any say where they're sited. It's only a state thing. But this organization will help alert people when there's a new CAFO going to be built by them, and will help them sometimes fight them. We've actually even had one shut down, which is very unusual for Iowa, because the industry has the upper hand in the legislature. So we don't have that many in Fairfield, so we're hoping to keep it that way. And another thing of leakage is erosion. And I'm going to show you a few slides from around my farm in 2008, where there was this big rainfall. And these are from right upstream from me, just across my fence, actually. And what happened is that, as I mentioned, corn and soybeans really only grow for about 4 months of the year. So we got rains in May, and the farmers couldn't get the corn planted, and the soils were saturated with water. And then we got more rains, and the soil was full. It couldn't take up any more water. Now, on my farm next door, I had been grazing the cows since the first week of April. And here we are in late May and early June, and the corn and soybeans aren't even growing yet, and the water is running off in the flooding. And whereas my soil was actually getting dry in the intervening times, at times, and needed the rainfall. But when it rained here, of course, the water couldn't go anywhere, and it caused a lot of erosion. Now, this is on my farm here. I have a little creek that's normally about 10 feet wide and about 8 inches deep. And we got a 2-inch rainfall during that flood, and it all soaked into my soil because it was getting dry. But because the corn and soybean land was saturated, from that 2-inch rainfall, this creek rose up from this pink line to here, just from that one rainfall. If we back up and look at it here, from here to here, it was like a raging river that whole valley had turned into. And so flooding is going to be inherently a problem in a situation like this. 2/3 of Iowa's land surface is planted corn and soybeans every year. So when you get these big rainfalls, we lack the capacity to absorb that water. And so now with increasing severity of rainfall events, we are in bigger trouble than before. And you can see even where there was no till and the corn stalks on the landscape, it couldn't hold it. So our system is not sustainable because the average erosion rate for corn and soybeans in the Midwest is 5.7 ton per acre. Soil forms at about 0.5 ton per acre, based upon a lot of research in various areas. So we're deficit spending on a 10-fold basis here already under normal conditions. Now these severe rainfall events are causing greater erosion, as a matter of fact. And as I mentioned, we lost half our topsoil. During that flood of 2008, during that week's time about, 10% of the cropland had 20 ton per acre of erosion from that one event. And this kind of illustrates it. This is a little bit of research from Iowa State that shows how much water from rainfall will infiltrate into the soil in a 1-hour rainfall. And they compared corn and soybeans to perennial plants like prairie plants. It'd be like or alfalfa would probably be similar. And they found that the perennials would absorb 5 to 7 times more rainfall in that first hour of rainfall than the corn and soybeans, which cover 2/3 of Iowa's landscape. So there's little wonder that we can flood easily. I forgot why I put that there, but people like to see cows anyway. Now, one more thing I wanted to mention about, and I'm going to get onto the positive side in a minute, but about the confinement systems. People will drive by a confinement animal system and say, boy, those pigs, they really smell bad. But I want to say, it's not the pigs you're smelling. It's not even the hog manure you're smelling. You are smelling compounds that are created in that liquid pit. Because the manure being stored in this liquid form, it turns anaerobic. And over 300 volatile organic compounds are created in that liquid anaerobic pit. And some of them you're familiar with, like hydrogen sulfide and ammonia and so on there. And so when you're driving by and smelling that, it's not the hogs, it's not even the hog manure, it's the compounds created in that pit, which are toxic. And actually, if the fans go off for a few minutes even, under certain conditions, the hogs can die from the fumes. And even the workers have died from that in the past. So we want to vindicate the hogs here. It's not the hogs you're smelling. Now compare that to out in the pasture. Now you haven't had lunch yet, have you? So, when a cow drops manure out in the pasture, that's an aerobic decomposition process. Now right underneath that cow patty are billions of bacteria just waiting for a meal. And so they will decompose that aerobically. And so the byproducts will be carbon dioxide and water. And so you won't have that odor. And of course, it'll be utilized, the nutrients, right where it's produced. And this is a cow patty dried out and kicked over. And I counted like 30 to 40 earthworms under each cow patty decomposing that. So this is a whole different process in a natural ecology compared to the industrial manure management system. And also composting, if it's done right, is an aerobic process. And it shouldn't be odor, it shouldn't have any odor really. It's just water and carbon dioxide in the composting process, or the byproducts. So now, can we design and manage farming systems that utilize those principles of ecology? We can harness that energy and organizing power of nature. And I think that's the key thing here. Because now it's common understanding the longer we farm, the more we compromise our environment, our water quality, our soil quality, our wildlife habitat. And it's sadly been true. But if we can design and manage farming systems on the model of ecology, then we can start to rebuild them, improve our water quality, improve our soil quality, improve wildlife habitat. We can improve all our resources, really, if we do it right. Before, though, I want to look at how we got here. The Industrial Revolution began in England about 250 years ago, but it was slow to come to take over ecological systems. Textiles and printing presses can be put into factories real easily. But soils are more of an open system, and rainfall is hard to control agricultural systems. However, after World War II, pesticides and fertilizers became widely available. Suddenly now, farmers had these tools. Before, they had animals integrated on the landscape so that they worked together. The animals provided fertility, the manure, and you had to have a diversity of crops to feed the animals, and so they were together. Now, you could leave the animals off the farm for cropping and use pesticides to control what rotations had control before, and we can use fertilizers to put the fertility down instead of manure. So as Wendell Berry said, we took an elegant integrated system, broke it up, and created two problems, one with industrial livestock production, one with industrial crop production. And it even took a little longer for the confinement animal feeding operations, CAFO is the term people use, to come into being, like in the 1980s, 1990s. However, the historical pundits tell us that that's when the information age really took over. And so really what happened is our agriculture has become fully industrialized just in time to be obsolete. And what that means is the industrial age, the information age for agriculture, it means knowledge of ecology, of the life cycles of plants and insects and weeds and diseases. And so, and also knowledge of nutrient cycling. So now we can take the best knowledge of a traditional agriculture and marry that with new knowledge of the science of ecology and bring those together and be at a whole new level. And we can really circumvent some of the things of industrial agriculture. Using correct rotations, we can circumvent the need for pesticides, and using animals on the landscape, we can get away from some of the fertilizers as well. So we can harness that organizing power of nature. Now I'm going to go to my farm, and we moved to this farm in 1996. I came from Washington, from USDA in 1982. My wife and I, we bought the dairy that was already existing, and then we moved to this location in 1996. And this farm had been in corn and soybeans for many years. Originally, it had been a farmstead, and this is the only piece, the only building left, an old corn crib on that farmstead. And since it's pretty hilly land, and it had been in corn and soybeans for many years, and some of the waterways were actually like 3 or 4 foot gullies. So we had to fill those in. And in some places, the topsoil was all gone on the hillsides. All the topsoil was eroded away. And so remember that black soil I showed you early? Well, you can see this is down to the subsoil. And further down in the landscape, at the bottom of the hill, is some of the topsoil that came off the upper side. So in some way, we're starting over like the glacier just receded, on this farm to try to rebuild it. And so what we did is we put in a diversity of grasses and clovers, try to mimic only different plant species, but mimic the whole process that built the prairie soils in the first place. And we split up a large segment into many small pastures with electric fences in them. Here are lanes for the cows to get out to the pastures. These pastures are about 2 acres each. So what we do is we milk the cows twice a day. After each milking, they go to a fresh pasture, and then they keep moving around. And then, of course, the grass regrows, and then it's kind of like the bison moving around the prairie, only we can control just where they go. We give them just as much grass as they can eat in one half a day. And we can also control the quality. It can be very lush and very nutritious in that way. And so here you can see a fence between where we grazed and where they'll be next. And then it'll regrow as we move around the pasture. Now, what we're not doing is what you sometimes see when you drive around. Sometimes you see cows on a pasture, and it looks like this, maybe with or without the thistles. What basically is bluegrass, like lawn grass. The reason that happens is this is continuous grazing, where they put the cows out in one big field, and they stay there all the time. What happens then is the cows will nip off the grasses they like best first, and keep nipping them to the ground until they kill them. And they'll keep doing that until pretty soon all that can survive this close grazing is bluegrass. And so you end up with a monoculture grass, which is short, because bluegrass can survive that short growth stage. And that means all of the roots are very shallow too. So it's not very resilient kind of system. So when you get into a drought system, it quickly dries out. Now this picture is not from my farm, either one of these, but this shows the same farm that all they did was they changed the management. Instead of having the cows there constantly, they had the cows graze it, then they took it off and let it rest and recover. And they found that within 1 year, they had tall grasses in there after all, and that became back. And it was much more productive just by changing the management. They had a much more productive pasture and more diverse and taller plants and deeper roots. Now, if you compare that with cows in confinement, you can see it's not quite as natural or comfortable probably of an environment for the cows as compared with being on grass. And also the energy requirements. Now, when cows are in feedlot, then you have to bring all the feed to the animals instead of them harvesting it. For example, instead of them grazing the grass, you have to chop it and cut it and chop it and put it up in the silos and store it, and then feed them day by day, and then collect all the manure in storage, and then haul that all back out into the fields. And so all those steps, we probably wouldn't have done that if it weren't for cheap oil, cheap fossil fuels. But that's kind of the predominant model right now. Now you compare that to if you have it designed right, all we have to do after each milking is open the next gate. The cows go in the pasture, we close the gate, they harvest their own feed, they spread their own manure right where it needs to be, they enjoy their work, and they're healthier because they're in their natural environment. Cows on pasture tend to live a fair bit longer, maybe twice as long as milk cows in confinement. As a grazing magazine editor once said, it's the nature of grass to stand in one place, and the nature of cows to move around. But what we've done is we made the cows stand in one place and made the grass move to the cows. And then, of course, we don't need all that big equipment for moving the feed and the manure. We have four-wheelers to open gates and build fences and so on. It saves a lot of energy as compared to growing the corn and soybeans and harvesting it and feeding a lot of grain. Now, most cows in confinement, they get a lot of corn. Now, corn in their diet makes a lot of milk. They'll produce a lot of milk, but corn is not natural through their system. Cow is a rumen that evolved, thank you. Does that fit in there? Yeah, that'd be good. Evolved eating forage, and so they're designed to eat forage. And when you put grain in there, It'll give a lot of milk, but it causes acid conditions and it causes a whole range of metabolic problems and even foot problems. So the corn does, on a short range basis, produce more, but in a long range, it causes more health problems. Actually, we have very few vet bills. As a matter of fact, my wife does all the paperwork. And one year, when we were to our tax preparer, he was asking her how much each of our categories were, like repairs and supplies. And he said veterinary expenses, and she said 0. So for that 1 year, we had actually a 0 veterinary expense, and usually it's within a few $100s compared to some dairies that might be that much per cow. However, we do harvest our own forages because what we do is early in the year, when the grass is growing really fast, the cows can't keep up. So then we'll harvest some of that and make bales, big round bales, and we'll store that for the winter. So what I want to point out here is that we're not like going back to Grandpa's day here. We have equipment that can harvest things very efficiently. When I was a kid, people often will criticize organic farming and say, well, you're going back to Grandpa. We can't go back there to horse and buggy days. But this machine here will harvest, cut and windrow about 10 acres per hour. Now, when I was a kid, we had a mower like this. It was actually made for horses, converted to a tractor connection here. This isn't the one we had, but it was similar, and it had a shorter cutting blade, actually. But one person sat back here, one person sat in the tractor, and we could probably cut 1 to 2 acres in an hour with that system. Now one person can cut 10 acres an hour, which is a 20-fold increase in speed. So we're not really shunning technology. We're just trying to use the appropriate technology. And for baling hay too, now I pulled this off the internet. When I was a kid, we didn't have 3 people standing in the wagon, just one. But we had 2 of them unloading the hay in the barn. A crew of 4 could probably do 50 ton in a big long day, make 50 ton of hay. 4 people in a long, hard day. Now with modern technology, I can do it in 2 hours, the same amount of baling and putting the hay away. So we do use modern technology. Interestingly, this is clarified butter, actually ghee. Some people call it ghee. We make it from the cows when the cows are on grass, because milk from cows on grass and meat is higher in omega-3 fatty acids and conjugated linoleic acids. Here the beta-carotene is showing through. And Susan, my wife, always makes the year's supply of butter. She makes it into ghee in the summer when the cows are on grass. We ran out last year about March, and so she made some from the milk from the cows on hay, and I was pretty amazed. It snaps your socks, Bob. We heard a new term this morning. The difference between the cows on grass and the cows eating hay. And so when cows are on grass, there's more omega-3 fatty acids, conjugated linoleic acids, and other things that people are just starting to research and see what health effects there may be there. So basically, the cows are healthier because they're in a natural diet. The forage is more diverse and is a healthier stand of forage. The soil is healthier, and the people who eat the product should be healthier too. So it seems not ironic, but if we use the natural model, all the pieces kind of fall together. Now, maybe you've seen recently the Stanford organic study where they basically concluded there's little nutritional benefit to organic food. And some people were concerned about this study because they didn't look at some of the major factors why people actually eat organic food. One is that it means less pesticides in the environment, and the other is fewer residues in the food. But there are some difference. We just saw with the ghee, we saw there are some nutritional differences, and people are just starting to open that up as an area of investigation. And you may know more about that than I. They concluded there was a 31% reduction in pesticide residues in organic food, but really the methodology for this was I don't think very sound, because they found 38% of the conventional food had residues of pesticides, but 7% of the organic had residues, and so they subtracted it out and they said 31% reduction. But actually, in truth, if you divide that 38 by 7, you get about 6.5 times reduction in pesticide residues. And they also only looked at whether there was a hit, yes or no, not what the concentration was, or if there were multiple pesticides, which are more frequently in the conventional system. So I think that was not really, the data was not analyzed very well. And they concluded that organic food wasn't really worth the cost. But I wanted to also point out that we don't really know what the effects of these residues are. We know for organophosphates, new studies show that very low levels in a part per billion range can cause developmental disabilities in children when their mothers were pregnant and were eating those levels. And glyphosate is found now at a very low level of a part per billion or less to show changes in frog development. And I like to do a little calculation, if you like, your stoichiometry. I did a calculation, how many molecules of 100 molecular weight pesticide will be in your glass of water? If it's 1 part per billion water and 100 molecular weight pesticide, there will be 3 quadrillion molecules in that glass of water. It's really kind of amazing to think about that. Now, I know that there has to be enough to make an effect, but we don't really know where that is. But personally, I'd prefer to have mine without the 3 quadrillion molecules of penicillin or atrazine in it. Now, what we do is we try to extend the grazing season as long as possible. Here you can see the trees are just starting to make leaves. So usually the first week of April, this year in March, the grass is just starting to take off. Then we start grazing because we have all these paddocks, these pastures, and we want to start right away. So by the time we get around, the first one is growing up to a better height. If we wait till it gets to this height and then start grazing, by the time we get around, it'll be overgrown. So that way we sequence the whole farm. So now we can continue grazing, and the pastures are all in different sequences of grass height. And we also, in the fall, we extend as long as we can because the growing season stops like sometime in October usually. And what we can do is starting in August, we can set aside some areas where we don't graze and let it grow up. And then when the growing season stops in October, we can come back and graze those areas into November, into December to extend the grazing season. Then we only have to stored feed for about 4 months of the year, so under ideal conditions. Now, just a little bit about how we put the infrastructure together. The cows have to get out to the pastures, so we had lanes for them, and they turned muddy and eroded. So what we had to do is we shaped the lanes and put heavy rock down the bottom and then finer rock on top, and they made a solid surface for the cows to get out there. These lanes are about 15 years old now, and they're working really well still. So the cows can get out to the pasture in any weather. And that actually can work to our advantage sometimes if it rains a lot. If it rains a lot, they get in a paddock for a half a day or a day, and they can really mud it up. And you might think, wow, it really destroyed that. But because we take them out again right away the next day, it recovers it's amazing how it recovers. And so we can even use that to our advantage. Sometimes when we get a prolonged rainy period, we'll put them in areas that are kind of sod bound. We try to keep about half and half clover and grass. And over time, the clover sometimes disappears and the grass gets more and more sod bound. So then when we get a long rain spell, we'll put them in those sod bound paddocks, and the cow's hooves will chop up the sod, and then we can get more clover established in there and keep that balance. So we can actually manage our mixture, our diversity on the landscape by how we manage the cows grazing. Now here's our little chicken house. A number of farms have done this. Here I took an old pickup truck that was no longer roadworthy, and I made a chicken house on it. Here's where you get the eggs out the side, and you open the door, and out come the chickens. And they are our fly control squadron. They run around the barnyard, and they scratch around. They eat the fly larvae before the flies hatch. And I think they do a pretty good job. We originally had it mobile because, like some other farmers have done, we had it following the cows around the pastures, about 3 days behind. So when the flies would lay the eggs in the cow manure, chickens would come around, scratch, and spread out the manure and eat the fly larvae. However, the coyotes were eating too many chickens, so we brought them home. But they do a really good job around the cow yard. And they're laying hens, so they not only work for free all day, but when it's time to lay an egg, they run in that chicken house in their nest and they lay their egg. So we have a free egg as well. And it's amazing to watch them. Here they're trying to pick flies off a cow's back, and one was jumped up on a cow's back. And one day I saw one had a dead mouse in its beak, and they were fighting over it actually. And since then I've seen that if a mouse runs by a chicken, one pick and a shake and it'll kill it. It's really like Jurassic Park actually. You know, as a friend of mine said, a chicken is built like a miniature Tyrannosaurus Rex, and so they're really pretty vicious little things. And also they're real scavengers, thinking about ecological model too. They don't let anything go to waste. Here I had during milking the bull eating some grain, and anything he spilled, they were eating it right up. And it's not like they're really hungry. People say how fat our chickens are, but it's just their nature just to eat it. One day I looked and they were all gathered together, and apparently I had driven by with a round bale of hay and some alfalfa had fallen off, and they were stripping the leaves off it. just ecology in action, don't waste anything. But now, I said we had to bring the cows home. But since we have a lot more diversity in the landscape, we have more trees as well and grasses. We find a lot more wildlife. And we have, for example, wild turkeys running around and following cows around. So I'm hoping they can do some of what the chickens were supposed to do. We also see swallows flying over the herds, often constantly, and flocks of cowbirds sitting on their backs and on their faces, even cow egrets we've seen. So we're hoping that the ecology can kind of take over some of that, and we don't have to do anything to manage them. They manage themselves. But fly control, we have a lot of different things. It's like Bill McKibben said for energy. Don't look for one silver bullet, look for silver buckshot. A lot of things that all together work together. And one thing we have where we milk the cows, we have these sticky tapes, little thin sticky tapes, and they come in 1,800-foot rolls, and they get full of flies when the cows come in, and then we just roll them up. And so we can roll them up once or twice a day, and the flies will come off the cows and go up into those little traps. So that's one thing that's pretty effective. Another thing is that we discovered that soybean oil, we use organic soybean oil. Soybean oil will actually kill flies on contact. So I put together a automobile sprayer and blast the cows back when they have flies on. And this is really dead flies. You can't tell it, but the small species of horn flies, it'll kill them on contact. And the bigger species of stable flies, it sends them in a tizzy, and they get a little confused, and they end up in the sticky tape by the end of milking. Now, also what we do is we have these, we get these little predator flies, and we get in the mail a package once a week. And there are larvae, and they hatch out these little bitty flies. And these little flies will lay their eggs in the pest flies larvae and eat the larvae and prevent them from hatching. So we get about enough to hatch out 150,000 of these little predator flies once a week in the summertime. And we spread them around. Here I made like an oversized salt shaker, and I can drive around the pastures and sprinkle them where the cows have been and put them around the cow yard. Now, as far as wintering the cows, at first, what I did for wintering cows, I had a south-facing building where in the summer. In the wintertime, the sun would get low on the horizon and go way to the back of the building, and the cows had a nice, comfortable place for eating their hay and so on. And I unrolled bedding. This tractor had a bale unroller for bedding for them. It worked great, but by spring we had about 4 feet of bedded pack manure that we had to break up and compost. It made great compost, but it takes a lot of energy to do that. So what we've been doing, as other farmers are doing who do grazing, it now is selecting certain areas of the farm. We outwinter the cows. We select an area that needs more fertility, and then each time we give them a bale of hay, we move it to a different location. And so they spread their manure all around where they're eating, and then they have places to lay around elsewhere. And so by spring, that whole area is fertilized. And if we do it right, we have just the right amount of fertilizer on there, and also a lot of fibrous stuff that keeps the manure in place. So for water quality, it protects it that way. So that saves all the energy of having to haul the winter manure as well. And if it snows, we can unroll old bedding for the cows to lay on. Now, I didn't realize I had that in there. Usually I only use this for farm audiences. But when an animal dies on the farm, it used to be we call the rendering works, and they pick it up and pay you for the animal. Now they charge you to haul off the animal. And I thought, well, that's not very ecologically sound, because I'm paying somebody to take my nutrients off the farm. So what I do now is I compost them, lay down a pack of bedding with a lot of fiber in it, a lot of carbon, and then cover it up with about 2 feet so that the coyotes don't dig in there. And in about a month or two, it'll decompose all the flesh on it's amazing. A good hot pile will decompose the animal, except for the bones. I'm still working on trying to get the bones done in less than geologic time, though. So here's where we milk the cows. The cows come in the back here, and they come out here. And attached to that is our processing plant, where we process the milk on the farm. Now, until a few years ago, we were the only dairy farm in Iowa that processed milk on the farm. Generally, dairy farmers will send the milk off bulk to central processing. Now there are about a dozen farms that do it, which shows that there's more interest in locally produced food. Here's where we milk the cows with milking machines, about eight milkers at a time. A double-sided 16 cows come in at one time. So it milks pretty efficiently. It's a real simple system. And then the milk goes into the bulk tank, which is every dairy farmer does. And like I said, mostly it gets sent off into central processing. But on processing days, we hook up, sanitize our pipes, and we pump it through the wall into our processing plant. Comes through that wall into our pasteurizing vats. Here's where we pasteurize the milk. we have a steam jacket around the outside of this vat, and we have a boiler in the back that makes steam and heats it up to 145 degrees for half an hour. That's the lowest temperature allowed by law to make it pasteurized. Now in Iowa, all milk has to be pasteurized. There are no legal raw milk sales. Maryland, I believe, is the same thing. About 2/3 of the states allow some raw milk sales. Here we bottle the milk, we make fluid milk, whole milk and 2% in skim milk. Now we don't homogenize the milk, so the cream comes to the top. And we have Jersey cows, which have rich milk. So the whole milk is like 5 to 5.5% butterfat. And so we get a big cream line on it. Normally, most milk, virtually all milk, is standardized. It may come out of the cow 4% butterfat or something, but it's standardized down to 3.25% butterfat. So any whole milk you buy in the stores otherwise is 3.25. So ours comes in pretty rich, and some people really like that. Some people like the fact that it's not homogenized. Apparently there's some data out there that shows some health effects from not homogenizing, and I certainly wouldn't cite that here in a health group. So, but we also make some cheese and yogurt. Here's where we make the cheese. Mostly, cheese is usually made in a low vat that's square and easy to work over, but we've kind of improvised with our pasteurizing vat. This is the first stage of cheese making, where first it turns into one big curd. That's really like Jell-O, like milk Jell-O, after it's coagulated. Then you have to cut it into cubes, the curds. You know, you've had cheese curds. So what we do is we just take a stainless steel hamburger grill and cut it into 3 dimensions. We cut it into cubes to make the curds, and then it goes through a process of washing the curds and heating them to make them firm, and then salting them and putting it into hoops. And this is a Monterey Jack cheese we're making here. We sell it fresh. We don't age it or anything, and it's really actually kind of buttery since it's whole milk, Jersey milk. People really love it. But I learned something when I started making cheese, is that brick cheese is called brick cheese because it was originally pressed with bricks. So when I was pressing these, I was making in these blocks. I thought maybe I have block cheese, and I was pressing with cement blocks. That made more evidence I had block cheese. But one day it was a Monterey Jack cheese. One day I was messing around how to press it, and I had a hydraulic jack pressing down, and I realized I actually did have Jack cheese. So then as Bob said, we sell it all locally through about 3 grocery stores and about a dozen restaurants. And so our delivery truck, we take it out the day we process it. We try to deliver about half of it, and then the rest of it the following day. So we bottle milk on Monday and Thursday, and normally make cheese on a Friday. So this is one of the chain stores that we sell to, a chain store in Iowa, Hy-Vee stores. And there's another locally owned store called Everybody's. And anybody ever heard of Fairfield, Iowa? Nobody, wow. Fairfield is a place that about 30 or 40 years ago, a university owned by the Transcendental Meditation Organization moved to Fairfield. Maharishi International University, you've heard of it. And people from all over the U.S. came there to participate in that process. And there's a lot of interest in healthy foods, in off-the-grid energy systems, alternative building systems. So it's kind of a unique culture for Iowa. But we sell all of our dairy products in that little town. I thought I should let you know that it's a little bit of unique culture. But also, we've grown incrementally over many years, which makes it possible for us to sell the milk from 80 cows in a little town like this. But this is a locally owned grocery store, and they specialize in organic foods and whole foods. For example, this produce here, it's all organic in this rack. Mostly, you go to a grocery store, they have a corner with organic food. Here, all this produce is organic, and then they have a corner over here that says not organic. So it makes it a good place for us to market our product. And here's our milk on the shelf. You can see here, this is the whole milk. You can see the cream line, 2%. The cream we take off the skim milk. Actually, people prefer the whole milk. Here's whole milk. Here's skim milk. And the cream we take off the skim milk and 2% we put into whipping cream, so that's how we sell the cream off the milk. Our yogurt, we put in tall quart bottles. We don't have a cup filler, so we put it in our bottle, or we put it in there, and then we make the yogurt. It sets in the container, so people just have to squeeze it out. They really like our yogurt. It must be the Jersey milk that it makes it extra good, I guess, because people really like it. They don't mind that container. I wanted to go here on quickly on look a little bit at energy for agriculture, because I think that's going to be the big game changer. At some point we aren't going to have the energy that we have today, and it's going to get prohibitively costly. And so we're going to have to look at how we're going to become self-sufficient for energy. And on the farm, I told you I had these paddocks. Here's an electric fence. Cows graze on both sides. We have a water tank. And I made a system to inject pipe in the ground for getting the water to those tanks, and put a 1,000-foot roll of plastic pipe in there and injected it on the ground. That we had all the water tanks fed the water from a central source. And then what we did is the central source became this big tank here. In the back of the farm, we have a large pond with a solar panel and a pump in the pond. We pump that water to this 4,000-gallon tank, and then the gravity feeds to all the paddocks. So we basically get energy-free water for the cows that way, which is good because southern Iowa does not have good well water, and farmers generally use what's called rural water, city water pumped to the countryside. So this system saves me about a couple $100 a month just in water costs. Other things we do on the back side of that, on the bottom side of this dike, we have a water for the winter, actually summer and winter, and this is a tank that doesn't freeze in the winter because this big tube goes deep in the ground about 8 feet, and then the geothermal heat keeps it from freezing. So all winter long we can outwinter cows there, and they can have water that won't be frozen up, which helps us a lot for energy. We have another one similar in another pond, and this one also doesn't freeze, and it's different though in that it has the pipe coming under the dike from the pond, but it overflows constantly. But it doesn't overflow over the ground here. In the back is a standpipe that it overflows into, and so it runs into a nearby ditch. And so that little bit of trickle of water will keep the water from freezing all winter long. So we, again, don't have to use energy to keep it going. Other things, we have solar-powered electric fencers that we can use all over the farm. We put in a solar thermal system for heating hot water. We use a lot of hot water to clean our milking systems and for processing too. And so we have 4 panels, 4 feet by 10 feet long, to heat the hot water, and it'll get up to about 140 to 145 degrees in the summertime to preheat our water. Then we kick it up to 185 for washing. We have a wind turbine that we're putting up. Here it's just photoshopped in the farm. But I've gotten a USDA grant, and it looks like I'm going to be able to start next week, and we're hoping to get it up. It's going to be a 40 kilowatt, 120-foot tower, and it'll produce on a net basis all the electricity that we use on the farm. Although we don't have net metering, but it'll produce about as much electricity as we use. And one other feature, I built a house on the farm, and one thing we did is we put a geothermal system in. We have a pond right next to the house. In the basement, instead of a furnace, we have a geothermal heat exchanger, so we heat and cool the house by taking heat out of the pond and putting heat back in the pond. And so it's very, very efficient, thick-walled house too, 6-inch walls. And also, this cupola is open, and the window's open from downstairs, and it's open all the way down through the stairwell to the first floor. So in the summer, we open the windows up here and open windows downstairs, and we get this strong convection current, and it cools the house. So we rarely do use air conditioning, actually. The Practical Farmers of Iowa is an organization in Iowa that they've been doing energy work, and they did an audit of my energy use and looking at diesel and electricity and gas, propane and gasoline. And here, the diesel went up. We got added 220 acres to our farm. But if you can see, the propane is the dark line. When they put in the solar hot water system, we kind of came down, but we need to add some more panels. We aren't really taking care of it as much as we should. And if we put the wind turbine up, we can eliminate this, maybe on a net basis, eliminate the blue electricity line. But this is energy use in terms of energy. Now, if we look at it in terms of CO2 emissions, you can see, because we have a lot of coal in Iowa, that the electricity is a huge CO2 emitter. And if we can eliminate that, we'll be reducing our carbon footprint considerably. And I wanted to make a plug, thinking a little bit about how we approach energy in this country, especially for agriculture. I think we're doing it upside down. We're looking at centralized systems, and I think we need to look at distributed systems, on-farm energy production. For example, ethanol. We have this big ethanol push. Now 40% of our corn crop in the country goes to make ethanol. And the ethanol industry will tell you that, yeah, but it replaces 10% of our gasoline. Well, if you look at that, ethanol only has 2/3 of the energy of gasoline, so that 10% is really only 6.67 on that basis. However, ethanol also has a lot of embedded energy from growing the corn and making the ethanol. 2/3 of that energy is probably embedded fossil fuel energy. So that 10% now goes down to about 2.2% on a net energy basis that we're replacing. And if we look at that, the average car in this country gets lousy mileage. The EPA said, as a couple of years ago, 20.4 miles per gallon. Now, what if instead of making all this ethanol using 40% of the corn crop, we would increase our mileage by 2.22%, what would happen? We would need to go all the way up to 20.85 miles per gallon. The point is that we're making this ethanol in a centralized system using a lot of inputs, and we're not gaining very much. We could gain a lot faster by efficiency. Now, what does it take to do that? 40% of our crop, a third of it comes back as feed value. For every gallon of ethanol made from corn, we lose 2 gallons of soil to erosion. Now, that's something to think about when you fill your car with ethanol. And of course, corn is a major contributor to the dead zone. And if we look at our fuel economy, I mean, this is where we could really make the efficiency. Here, this is Japan, looking at their mileage over the years, 2000 to 2010. 45, almost 50 miles per gallon. Here's Europe, shooting for over 50 miles per gallon. Here's Australia. Here's Canada. Here's the US. And so you can see that we're putting all this stuff into making ethanol, and it's getting us from here to about here. And we have the technology to get way up here instead. So I think it's a little ludicrous. I think this kind of epitomizes. This guy's getting 23 miles per gallon. This guy's getting 46. But this guy can't figure out what it would take to cut his cost in half. That's kind of how we are stuck, I think, in this country. Now, we do have the technology. I mean, this is a Prius. This is what I drive. It's about 6 years old and 7 years old. And it just gets, 40 to 43 miles per gallon regularly. And just to see what I can do, I put in a plug-in hybrid addition. So in the back, I got a plug-in here. In the back, pull up the console. And there are lithium-ion batteries, and underneath that box is another set in the spare tire well, lithium-ion batteries. So with this system, I can get now like about 80 to 100 miles per gallon in town going slow. On the highway, it'll be like 50 to 60, depending on how heavy my foot is. But so we have the technology to get really great mileage. We could reduce our gasoline use by half easily, but we're stuck on these centralized, politically popular systems. One thing that Organic Valley has been doing, it's a cooperative. They have a mobile biodiesel system, so you can use the fuel on the farm. So a farmer can grow like soybeans or canola, press it on the farm, power their machinery right on the farm. Now, to me, that's a good way to go, because when you're making ethanol, farmers are shipping a commodity to the central processing. They're getting the lowest price that the commodity buyers will give them for it, but they're paying retail rates for their fuel. They're selling cheap and buying high. And so here, if we can produce it on the farm, we can retain all that value on the farm. So this is one really good idea, I think. They're projecting that an average dairy farm in their system, if they take 10% of their tillable acres, they could produce 70% of their fuel needs, and the byproduct would produce 50% of their protein meal needs for their cows. So that's, I think, a way we need to look to become more self-sufficient, because now we're using agriculture to produce fuel for cars going down the highway, and we're not making agriculture self-sufficient. Another really exciting possibility is pyrolysis, a thermal kind of system. It means heating biomass. How many have heard of pyrolysis? Okay. It's a matter of heating biomass in the absence of oxygen. So you vaporize it, and then when you cool it, the heavy molecules will make bio-oil. The light molecules are a burnable gas. And so we can make a fuel. Now that bio-oil can be processed into gasoline and diesel. Just to show what can be done, the key thing is it can be done on a small scale. During World War II, they used pyrolysis because they were short of petrol to power cars. Over 500,000 cars were converted in Europe. This is a pyrolysis system. Not that we're going to do it this way, but just to show what's possible. They put wood in there, vaporized it. The vapors went up into the intake manifold, and they ran the car on wood vapors. Now it can be done on a small scale, a farm scale. Here's a tractor that was running on pyrolysis in that era. So the point is that we can decentralize this kind of thing, and we can use perennial crops. Instead of using corn, for every gallon of ethanol from corn, we lose 2 gallons of soil. We can plant prairie plants or use a woodlot where we're actually rebuilding our soil, and we can have set aside an area that produces the plant material, the biomass, and then on-farm processing. Purdue University is looking at a mobile system where instead of every farmer having to buy a pyrolysis unit, you could go from farm to farm, make the fuel on the farm. Now, at this point, that bio-oil has to be taken to central processing for refinement. But if we can refine it on the farm, we'd really have something going, I think. Here's a Honda made to run on the pyrolysis. This is a mobile system from Canada, the same idea. And I'm going to skip all these steps. Well, just basically, you take an agricultural product, you make through pyrolysis, the gases keep it hot, the oil can be made into fuels. The biochar is a great soil amendment. It will build the soil up and it sequester carbon for like 1,000 years. An incredible thing. And I'm going to skip this pyrolysis thing because we're getting to the end. The other thing was with wind. Now in Iowa, 20% of our electricity, 23% of our electricity comes from wind, which is the most of any percentage-wise, any state. However, that's good, but these wind farms are mostly owned by out-of-state corporations, and much of the electricity goes out of state. So we're extracting the resources from the farm. And the farmers are getting a small amount of payment for that wind turbine, relatively, percentage-wise. They're still paying retail rates for their electricity. So again, they're selling cheap and buying high. Now, if we can put wind turbines in Iowa, at least we have the good wind turbines on every farm, so that the wind that blows over the farm powers the farm. The wealth created stays locally. And what a really exciting development, this is going to be the last thing, I'm getting to the end, is that is to make a fuel from wind power, and take wind and to make ammonia. And it's they're doing it in Minnesota, and somebody in Iowa is trying to do it on a small scale. To take you split the water molecule, and then you take nitrogen from the air and make ammonia. And this ammonia can be burned in an internal combustion engine. Whoops, back up one. This truck is made to run on ammonia. This tractor is made to run on ammonia. And the exhaust is water and nitrogen gas. So the whole process bypasses the carbon cycle. This is a really exciting thing. Now, I know there's some thermodynamics, we have some changes to energy, so there's some thermodynamics to consider. But in Iowa, often these big wind farms they're shut down because the electrical lines are full, and they have to shut them down. So if we could be making a fuel when they're shut down, otherwise it would be shut down, we could be making a fuel. It could be used for fertilizer, not the best fertilizer, but ecologically. But it could be made for a fuel. And also, if we could put the wind turbine on the farm to make the fuel on the farm to power the tractors, this is what we need to look for in the future. We don't want to wait till the industrial system goes off a cliff and then try to figure out how to do it. We need to have these models up and going. And I think I just wanted to show, this is where I showed we moved to this farm here about 17 years ago, 16 years ago, and this is what was there. Since then, we built a farmstead. And the reason I show this is that the person who sold us this farm grew up the road a little ways, and he said, he always tells me he's amazed because he saw many farmsteads disappear over the years, and this is the first time he saw one come back again. And the point is that in Iowa, you usually need about 1,400 acres to make a living in agriculture. Here, we can do it on a few hundred acres by diversifying, selling locally, and we can do it in a way that's ecologically sound and actually rebuilds our natural ecology. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francis. That was terrific. We have a couple of microphones circulating. People want to have questions. Please wait for the mic because this is being webcast.
Hi, my name's Becky. I'm Becky Neckman. I'm a CLF fellow. I was wondering whether eventually you were considering having crops on the farm as well?
We have been putting some crops on. We do feed some grain. We feed about 5 pounds of grain per cow during the summer and sometimes a little more in the winter. So we do feed a small amount of grain, whereas a conventional farm might feed 30 pounds of grain. And so we've been growing mostly small grains like barley and wheat on the farm because our farm is very hilly. We don't want to put row crops on any more than we have to. But so we're now trying to make our farm feed self-sufficient so that whatever grains we do feed, we grow on the farm in a diverse rotation. Good point, though.
Thank you, Francis. When you're talking about all that good butter fat, it reminded me that in the health field, fat kind of has achieved a bad name. And I just wonder if you have any thoughts about whole milk versus low-fat milk products, dairy products.
I'm a little reluctant to talk to a bunch of health people, professionals about.
Dive right in.
Well, I'll just say what people tell me. And people really appreciate our product. We get, people come out in the street, strangers saying how they really like our product. And partly because it's Jersey, even the skim milk where you take all the fat off, it has more protein and other solids, so it has a lot of body and has a lot more flavor. But a lot of people say they drink the whole milk, the whole unhomogenized milk. because apparently there's some data somewhere that shows that when you homogenize milk, you break up that butterfat globule, and at some point there's some enzyme, some research apparently shows that gets into your bloodstream that can attack your arteries, and then your body puts plaque on it. Xanthine oxidase, I think was the name of it, but I make no claims. But I think you're right that some people, there is a whole school of thought that natural fats like that are actually healthy, and it can even help you lose weight. People will argue that. Maybe, Bob, you want to weigh in on that? I don't know.
Actually, Pete had his hand up, and he's one of our
Okay.
resident experts in nutrition. And you had a question first, and then you can answer this question.
Maybe you can answer it first.
Yeah, the buttermilk and fat question is difficult with the in terms of health messages. But I had a question about the innovations and the technologies that you're using on your farm. I'm sure there's costs associated with them, and there are employees that you have to employ. I'm wondering, are there programs that you use through your connections with the government that help subsidize some of these ideas, or are these things that you've tackled by yourself? Some of the costs,
Okay. Yeah.
and what sort of effect do you think it has on your capacity to make a living if you employ many of these innovative technologies?
Okay, good question. We've done them ourselves. We did for the wind turbine. I have a 25% cost share on the wind turbine, so that's not built yet though. Actually, I did get a partial cost share on the water system, the solar water system, but I would have done that anyhow. It'd been a good investment. I think that in the long term, these things are good investments. And as far as we do have several employees, we have 4 employees actually, not all full time, but the way we price our product, we just, I'm not really into that enterprise analysis stuff. I just run around and have a good time on the farm. My wife is a finance person, but we price our products so that we can pay our bills and make a living. We're not going to get rich on it. And if our input costs go up and up and up, at some point we have to raise our price incrementally. But our prices are just a little bit probably under other organic dairy products in the store. So we have margin, and people really like our product, and so we could charge more, but we're selling it to our friends and neighbors, so we don't want to charge any more than we have to. But I think that it can be profitable.
Say a word about your employees.
Okay, we have one person who's full-time on the dairy milking side. He lives on the farm, and I think on that picture there, no, he wasn't there in that picture. We had another house there. And then we have 3 people who work in the processing plant, and they're all about 3/4 time because we process certain days of the week. Yeah.
Mia has a question. Okay.
I have the mic, Mia, so I get to go first. So my question is, for instance, can you talk a little bit about how much interest other farmers have shown in your operations? And do you see yourself as a leader in this field in Iowa? People are coming to see what you're doing. Just where do you see the trends going and where you are?
Well, we get a lot of visitors to our farm, not only other farmers that are looking at what we're doing, but also classes from Iowa State University and from other universities. So we get a lot of visitors, sometimes more than we can handle almost. But the farmers share from each other, and I go to conferences. I speak at a lot of conferences, but I also learn from other farmers. And farmers have field days. We we learn from each other. Now in Wisconsin, 25% of the dairy farms are grazing dairy farms. They may not all be quite this intensive, but a lot of them are. And so, I learned when I was at USDA. My brother, who was farming the farm I grew up on, he was one of the pioneers in developing the grazing system for dairy, and he was speaking at all the conferences. So when I came back and started, he came down to my farm, and in a few days we turned the whole farm into a grazing farm. So I learned, from him how to start. So we learn from each other, and I don't know what your question was anymore.
You're answering it.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Great talk. I was interested for maybe an insider's perspective or take on a lot of the propositions around the country in terms of labeling genetically modified food products.
Well, I think there's nothing wrong with having the freedom of the information to be able to choose what you want. So I certainly support the labeling issues. And I know it's controversial about GMOs. Some people, are very strong on one side, and some people are on the other side. But I don't see any reason, and I don't think it's going to cost what they say it's going to cost. I mean, we label for everything. When we had the country of origin labeling law, the industry said we can't do it. It's going to cost a fortune. Well, it does. We already have a label. I change my labels. We just got to put it on the label. So I don't see it as a big cost.
I was wondering if you could comment on the differences between raising dairy cattle and beef cattle and why you chose to raise dairy cattle.
The difference between dairy and beef. Well, I grew up on a dairy farm. And also, when I was at USDA in Washington, my friend already had this farm and was already processing milk on the farm on a small scale. So it was, I kind of wanted to get out of the big city. And it was the only dairy in Iowa that was processing on the farm. And so it was a unique opportunity. I didn't want to get off into commodity production. And this was a neat little opportunity. So that's why, otherwise I'd probably still be in Washington, D.C., That was fun too.
Hi. Can you tell us a bit more about your work at USDA and maybe how that influenced your farming practices now?
Well, I didn't actually tell people at USDA that I had been an organic farmer. I started organic farming in 1976, and I went to graduate school in the early 80s. But back in those days, organic had a real stigma in the scientific community, even sustainable agriculture. When I was at USDA from 88 to 92, there was a new sustainable agriculture initiative coming out. And those of us who were associated with that were heretics, like we were quasi-scientists. And so that was a real thing to work through. Now, organic has funding. It got funding at USDA, so now people who weren't at all interested are having strong interest. So now at the land-grant universities, organic, no problem. And so, things that the culture has changed so very much. Back then I worked mostly on water quality and a little on sustainable agriculture. But I don't know that it really influenced me so much as just what I learned from the organic community out there doing their work.
Mike Runner, Prerogative over here. Hi. I was going to ask a similar question to Julia. A lot of my work focuses on federal policy, and so I'm curious from your perspective, what can we do, what needs to happen to make these shifts more systemic?
Well, you're fighting the industry. It's because the industries push the commodity industry, the commodity groups, the Farm Bureau, they push for what they want to have, and it's an industrial model that they're pushing for. So we're up against a big fight here on that. Now it's interesting. Sometimes, like ethanol, the commodity groups pushed ethanol, and especially the corn growers, subsidies for that. However, the livestock groups started to realize, all the corn's going to ethanol. We don't have enough for livestock. It's costing too much. Now the livestock industry, the chicken, the hogs and dairy and beef are fighting against the ethanol mandate. So it's interesting to see those powerful lobbies fighting each other. But the main thing is that we have to realize who we're up against and try to find the pressure points where we can make a change. Not always easy.
There's another part of Frances' background that we haven't heard about today. That was your run for Secretary of Agriculture of the state of Iowa, where you were up against industry and the Farm Bureau, but you put up a good show. Would you care to comment on that a little bit? There are people in the audience who are interested in not only the policy-making process, but advocacy and engagement at the political level.
Okay. Well, there were a lot of issues in Iowa that weren't being discussed. The elephants in the living room, the ethanol thing, the CAFOs, that just even the newspapers kowtow and they don't want to talk about these things. So I thought, well, we got to have a discussion of these things. So one thing I did is I wrote the book that Bob mentioned, and my friends said, don't write a book, they'll attack you for everything in the book. But I said, that's what I want. And the funny thing is they did not. They tried to avoid it completely. And so the urban people really loved these issues, energy, animal systems that are ecologically based. The urban people were my real allies, but some of the farm, they didn't want to engage, for one thing. I thought surely that we could have a good hot debate on some of these things, but it didn't happen so much.
All right. I think, Elise, the last question.
This is actually a USDA question. There used to be a website called Agroforestry, and there was all sorts of information on it. You'd have 5 pages about a particular kind of duck and how you raise these ducks and what particular trees needed in soil and climate. And and it looked as if it had been done by the USDA for use in other parts of the world, but a lot of it would apply here too. And lately, I can't find that. Do you think there's some way I could sort of get into the USDA and find that data? Nobody would kill it, would they?
Think. I wasn't aware of that website, and what you need to try to, if you can remember what agency it was, there's about 25 agencies in USDA, distinct agencies, and so if you can find the right agency, then you can start tracking it down. Also, the University of Missouri has a lot on agroforestry. They do a lot of good work on there, but I wouldn't think that there'd be a conspiracy against agroforestry.
Thank you.
But it probably got buried. I know that the National Ag Statistics website, where you can get all the statistics, they changed it, and I couldn't find things. I have a hard time negotiating that website now. So it might be that it's hidden somewhere. It's moved.
Well, thank you very much, Francis. That was terrific.